the chipped tooth metaphor, Buddhist wisdom for overthinking, letting go, the genesis of the mental phantom, the architecture of uninvited consciousness. What if the individual who permanently populates your thoughts, the face that effortlessly manifests across the theater of your dreams, the voice that echoes through your quietest hours, and the memory that shadows your every step are not accidents of neurological wiring? For centuries, across silent meditation halls, remote mountain peaks, and deep, ancient forests, contemplative masters have understood a profound truth. The persistent thoughts that refuse to leave your mind are not your enemies, nor are they a sign of structural psychological breakdown. They are your greatest teachers, carrying highly specific, encrypted data designed to catalyze your spiritual awakening. When someone takes up permanent residency in your consciousness, the modern egoistic mind tends to frame them as an intruder. We perceive this cognitive presence as a splinter in the mind, a failure of emotional boundaries, or a humiliating manifestation of personal weakness. We exhaust our life force trying to evict them, applying quick-fix psychological tricks, forced distractions, and modern affirmation techniques that fade by morning, leaving the wound as raw as before. Traditional Buddhist psychology, however, offers a radical, counterintuitive shift in perspective. It asserts that the persistent mental presence of another person is not an error to be corrected, but a precisely engineered compass pointing directly to the unhealed territories of the human heart. You do not need to be an ascetic, a seasoned monk, or a highly spiritual master to utilize this deep wisdom. You simply need to be fully human, who is exhausted from fighting their own internal landscape and ready to understand the profound messages hidden within the heart. The illusion of control and the mechanism of fixation, the myth of the controlled mind. The foundational error we commit when confronted with obsessive thoughts is engaging in an internal war of attrition. We operate under the delusion that the conscious ego possesses the authority to dictate what the subconscious mind is allowed to process. We believe that if we just fight hard enough, push the memory away with enough force, or distract ourselves with enough intensity, the thoughts will simply vanish into the void. This is the great illusion of control. In the standard paradigm of modern psychological struggle, we treat the mind as a house that can be cleansed of unwanted guests through sheer force of will. But what we consistently fail to realize is that the very act of pushing away an internal phenomenon requires a massive investment of psychological energy. To consciously resist a thought, you must constantly maintain an internal representation of the very thing you are trying to avoid. You must keep the target in focus to ensure it remains expelled. Thus, the act of suppression becomes the ultimate form of fixation. Buddhism turns this approach completely on its head through the foundational practices of vipassana, clear seeing, and samatha, tranquility. Rather than attempting to force the mental landscape to conform to an idealized state of blankness, these traditions instruct the practitioner to change their relationship to the thought itself. The problem is never the presence of the thought. The problem is the violent contraction of resistance that occurs around it. The first universal law of mind: what you fight, you invest with your own personal power. What you resist persists because it utilizes the energy of your resistance to fuel its own longevity. What you meet with pure, spacious, non-judgmental awareness naturally exhausts its karmic fuel and transforms the chipped tooth metaphor. To understand why the mind exhibits this stubborn, repetitive behavior, consider the physical metaphor of the chipped tooth. If you break a tooth, even slightly, a fascinating biological and psychological phenomenon occurs. Your tongue will repeatedly, almost pathologically, return to the sharp edge. It will slide across the rough fracture dozens, if not hundreds, of times an hour. This movement is entirely involuntary. You do not issue a conscious command from the prefrontal cortex saying, "Tongue, go inspect the fracture." The tongue moves on its own instinctual accord. Why does the tongue do this? Is it trying to torment you? Is it acting out of a design flaw? Absolutely not. The tongue returns to the chipped tooth because the somatic wisdom of the body recognizes an interruption in the natural order, harmony, and polish of the physical form. It returns to the site of the break because it is seeking smoothness, completeness, and resolution. It is saying, in a language of direct sensation, "Pay attention." Something here is altered, incomplete, and unresolved. Your mind behaves exactly the same way when a relationship ends abruptly, when words are left unsaid, or when an emotional connection remains raw and jagged. The mental phantom that appears in your thoughts is not a random psychological glitch or a sign that you are losing your mind. Your attention keeps returning to the memory of that person because, like the tongue returning to the chipped tooth, your internal ecosystem recognizes that something within your relational world remains fractured, unintegrated, or incomplete. Your persistent thoughts are not the problem. They are your mind's unrefined, desperate attempt at a solution. They are the psychic tongue continually testing the boundaries of the wound, trying to heal it through the only medium it knows: repetitive representation, the architecture of mental saturation. To comprehend the sheer volume of energy that these phantoms consume, we must examine what Buddhist psychology calls the citta mind state, and how it becomes saturated by conditioned patterns, sankharas. When you are caught in an obsessive loop about someone, your mind is not experiencing a static state. It is producing a high-speed, self-reinforcing wheel of mental formations. Every time the image of the person arises, it triggers a subtle cascade of physical chemistry, a tightening of the solar plexus, a subtle elevation of the heart rate, a drop in the temperature of the hands. The ego, misinterpreting these bodily signals as definitive proof of the external person's supreme importance, immediately constructs a narrative to justify the physical discomfort. The narrative usually takes the form of endless questions. Why did they treat me this way? Did they ever truly value my presence? Are they thinking of me right now? Is there a reality where we could have achieved resolution? This narrative loop acts as a direct injection of fuel into the cognitive fire. The story generates more emotion. The emotion intensifies the physical sensations. The intense physical sensations demand more stories to explain them. Before long, your entire consciousness is saturated. You are no longer living in reality. You are living inside a highly combustible, self-contained simulator of the past. You are a prisoner in a cell where the bars are made of your own unexamined interpretations. Deconstructing the 7 karmic catalysts to halt this wheel of suffering, we must move beyond general psychological explanations and enter the precise analytical taxonomy of Buddhist psychology. The mind does not fixate universally, it fixates for highly specific reasons that correspond to specific structural components of our spiritual anatomy. To liberate oneself from the phantom, one must become a master cryptographer, accurately identifying which of the 7 distinct primary reasons is keeping the mental portal open. Catalyst 1. Attachment disguised as love, upadana versus metta. The most pervasive and socially reinforced source of mental fixation is the profound confusion between genuine love, metta, and attachment, upadana. Modern global culture, through its music, literature, and cinema, consistently conflates intense emotional obsession with the pinnacle of human devotion. We are taught that if we do not constantly ache for someone, if we do not lose our sleep and our peace over them, we do not truly love them. Buddhist psychology exposes this as a catastrophic misunderstanding of the human heart. Metta, loving-kindness, and upadana, attachment, are not different degrees of the same emotion. They are fundamentally opposed forces operating in direct contradiction to one another. When your mind is trapped in an obsessive loop fueled by upadana, you are not actually thinking about the real living human being who exists in the world. You are thinking about a highly curated, deeply romanticized mental idol that you have constructed to serve as the answer to your own internal void. You treat the other person as a permanent, unchanging object designed to guarantee your emotional safety. Your thoughts are anxious, desperate, and clingy. You do not wish for their well-being independent of your involvement. You wish for their well-being only insofar as it validates your worth. The Buddha identified upadana as the absolute primary cause of human suffering, dukkha. When we attempt to transform a transient, impermanent human being into the permanent source of our ultimate existential security, we are violating the fundamental laws of reality. It is equivalent to trying to build a fortress upon shifting desert sands. The moment the sands shift, the moment the person changes, walks away, or fails to meet our expectations, the fortress collapses, and our mind enters a state of high alert panic. This panic is what generates the endless looping thoughts. The mind is desperately trying to rebuild the illusion of safety by replaying the memory of the person over and over again, hoping that this time the sand will solidify. Catalyst 2. The unprocessed emotion and the physics of subconscious residue anaesthesia. The human emotional system operates under strict laws of conservation and completion. When an emotional event occurs within your life, it introduces a massive charge of energy into your mind-body system. If that energy is fully experienced, if it is met with absolute presence, allowed to ripple through the physical sensations of the body, and acknowledged without judgment, naturally completes its cycle, exhausts its charge, and dissolves back into the ground of awareness. However, most of our lives are lived in a state of chronic emotional avoidance. When a relationship ends abruptly, when a betrayal occurs, or when we are overwhelmed by the sudden loss of a connection, the raw emotional experience is too painful for the ego to integrate. We shut down. We suppress the grief. We push away the terrifying vulnerability. We lock down the white-hot anger. Or we refuse to fully feel the profound joy that we fear will be taken from us. In the precise language of the Abhidhamma, the ancient Buddhist framework of psychology, these uncompleted emotional experiences do not vanish. They drop beneath the level of conscious awareness and crystallize as anaesthesialatin tendencies or subterranean emotional residues. These anaesthesia are highly active psychological magnets. Because they are trapped in an incomplete state, they exert a continuous, silent pressure on the conscious mind, demanding resolution. They act like open, unvetted programs running in the background of a computer's operating system. You may be trying to read a book, complete a project at work, or engage in a new relationship, but the background program is continuously running, draining your cognitive bandwidth, consuming your creative energy, and generating the image of the person over and over again. Your mind is not bringing this person up to torture you, it is bringing them up because the trapped emotion is desperately seeking an exit point. The image of the person is the ultimate evolutionary key to the lock of that specific emotion. The mind presents the key, hoping that this time, instead of running away into distractions or getting lost in the narrative, you will finally have the courage to turn toward the underlying fire and feel it to completion. Somatic grounding and the architecture of release. To dismantle the phantoms of the mind, one must leave the arena of intellectual analysis and enter the pure laboratory of the physical body. You cannot think your way out of an obsessive thinking loop. Attempting to use the intellect to solve an intellectual obsession is like attempting to wash blood away with blood. It only deepens the stain. The absolute turning point in the Buddhist practice of liberation is the radical shift from the narrative dimension of the mind to the somatic dimension of the body. This is grounded in the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha's definitive discourse on the establishment of mindfulness, which explicitly states that mindfulness of the body, kayanupassana, is the gateway to all forms of ultimate psychological liberation. The practice of somatic tracking. The next time the phantom of the person who haunts you enters your consciousness, you must execute the great somatic pivot. The moment their face appears, or their voice echoes in your mind, you must recognize that your habitual response will be to follow the narrative trail. Your mind will want to enter the cinema, sit in the front row, and watch the movie of the past. You must flatly refuse to enter the theater. Instead, follow this precise empirical protocol. Drop the narrative structure, consciously drop the story. Treat the words, the memories, and the scenarios appearing on the screen of your mind as irrelevant background noise, like the chatter of a television playing in an empty room. Do not try to analyze whether the thought is true or false. Locate the physical geography. Turn your attention 180 degrees away from the mental screen and direct it straight down into the physical structure of your body. Ask yourself this fundamental question: where is this memory living in my flesh right now? Map the contraction. Scan your body with exquisite precision. Where is the visceral echo of this person? Is it a dense iron-like knot in the pit of your stomach? Is it a sharp, suffocating pressure directly over your anatomical heart? Is it a hot constriction around your throat, or a nervous, electric fluttering in your solar plexus? Deconstruct the sensation. Once you locate the physical contraction, zoom in on it. Investigate it as if you were a scientist examining a biological specimen. What are its exact properties? Does it have a shape? Is it heavy or light? Is it hot, cold, or vibrating? What are its boundaries? Radical, non-resistant breathing. Breathe directly into the center of that physical sensation. Do not breathe to make it dissolve. Do not breathe to fix it. Do not practice mindfulness as a covert weapon of elimination. Breathe simply to grant that physical knot absolute permission to exist within your body. Say to that knot of pain, through the language of pure presence, I see you. You are allowed to be here. As you maintain this steady, unmoving gaze upon the raw physical reality of the sensation, an extraordinary alchemical shift occurs. The mind-driven story loses its roots. Because you are no longer feeding the narrative with your attention, the cognitive loop begins to starve. Simultaneously, the trapped emotional energy within the body, finally met with non-resistant awareness, begins to soften, break apart, and melt away. The ghost is broken down into its true constituent elements, simple sensations of heat, pressure, and movement, which naturally rise, exhaust their evolutionary charge, and dissolve back into the wide, pristine space of your ultimate consciousness. This is the volume of work required to begin the true decoding of the human mind. The architecture of release is now set in motion, deepening the cryptography advanced karmic catalysts. Having deconstructed the structural foundations of fixation and the first two psychological entry points, we must now venture into the deeper, more subtle subterranean caverns of the human psyche. When a mental phantom persists despite basic somatic tracking and emotional labeling, it is often because the cognitive hook is anchored in the transpersonal, karmic, or shadow dimensions of your consciousness. To break these loops, we must continue our rigorous clinical mapping of the remaining 5 catalysts defined by ancient Buddhist contemplative science. Catalyst 3. Karmic entanglement and the law of relational resonance kamabandhana. In the Western psychological vernacular, we often speak of toxic loops, codependency, or unresolved trauma bonds. While these terms carry descriptive utility, Buddhist psychology offers a more expansive, cosmological framework, kamabandhana, or the binding nature of intentional action. Karma is neither a cosmic ledger of punitive retribution nor a mystical system of poetic justice. It is the literal, mathematical law of cause and effect operating within the matrix of human consciousness. Every intentional movement of the mind, every word spoken from a place of desire or aversion, and every relational choice leaves an indelible psychic imprinta seed known as a kamabija. Certain relationships carry an exceptionally high voltage of this karmic currency. You can immediately identify a karmic entanglement by 3 primary diagnostic markers: disproportionate intensity. The emotional or cognitive impact of the relationship is completely out of proportion to its physical duration. A 3-week encounter can spawn a 3-year mental haunting. Instantaneous familiarity, a profound, unshakable sense of significance or unrecognized familiarity from the literal moment of inception. Repetitive structural scenarios. The connection repeatedly forces you into the exact same painful archetypal positions, e.g., the abandoned child, the unappreciated caretaker, the invisible martyr. When an individual refuses to leave your thoughts due to kamabandhana, it means they are acting as an external mirror to an internal blind spot. Your mind is not looping because you are desperately in love with them. Your mind is looping because the relationship was designed to catalyze an evolutionary shift that you are actively resisting. The mind keeps presenting the image of the person because it is trying to force you to look at the unlearned lesson embedded within the relational wreckage. Consider the deeper layers of the practitioner mentioned in Volume I for years. Her mind was a violent storm of intrusive memories concerning a close friend who had systematically betrayed her trust. She filled dozens of journals with analysis, executed countless psychological cord-cutting rituals, and attempted affirmations of forgiveness. Yet every morning upon waking, the friend's face was the first image to materialize on her mental screen. The breakthrough did not arrive through emotional catharsis. It arrived through radical, cold self-inquiry during a period of intense silent sitting. She stopped asking, "Why did she betray me?" and began asking, "What internal structural vulnerability within me made this betrayal possible?" She forced herself to trace the lineage of the relationship. She realized that she had systematically ignored her own flashing intuitive warnings from the first week of their acquaintance. She had over-delivered resources, suppressed her own boundaries to avoid conflict, and allowed herself to be exploited because she harbored a deep, subterranean terror of being unvetted and alone. The realization was staggering. The friend was not the author of her suffering. The friend was simply the executor of a contract of self-betrayal that she herself had written. The friend had played their part perfectly, exposing her structural lack of self-worth and boundary dysfunction. The moment she extracted this pure, unadulterated wisdom from the experience, a profound shift occurred in her internal geography. She no longer needed the friend's apology. She no longer needed a different ending. The teacher had completed its brutal masterclass. The mental image of the friend, stripped of its karmic charge, transformed from a terrifying phantom into a benign historical artifact. Within weeks, the loop withered away entirely. Catalyst 4. Projection of the shadow and the phenomenon of the mirror. The human ego is constructed through a systematic process of violent editing. From early childhood, we are conditioned by family, society, and culture to identify with certain traits while aggressively disowning others. If you were raised in an environment that penalized weakness, you repressed your natural vulnerability. If you were taught that anger was inherently sinful, you drove your raw boundaries underground. These exiled fragments of the self do not dissolve, they form what modern psychology calls the shadow, and what Buddhist psychology recognizes as the unintegrated sankharas of aversion and delusion. Because the ego cannot bear to look at its own disowned fragments directly, it utilizes a highly sophisticated optical illusion. It projects them onto the canvas of other people. The individual who takes up an obsessive, frustrating residence in your head is almost always a highly magnetic screen for your personal shadow. This dynamic operates across two distinct poles: the mechanics of judgment fixation. Why do we spend hours mentally arguing with people we claim to despise? Why does the memory of an arrogant colleague, an irresponsible ex-partner, or a narcissistic family member loop endlessly in our consciousness, generating internal monologues of furious self-defense? Because their behavior threatens the structural stability of your ego's identity. If you have built your entire identity on being the hard-working, hyper-responsible savior, the presence of an individual who is unapologetically lazy, selfish, or reckless acts as an existential threat. Your mind fixates on them because it is desperately trying to maintain its sense of superiority over the very trait you have denied yourself. You are using their bad behavior to convince yourself that your self-imposed prison is a virtue, the mechanics of idolatry fixation. Conversely, when you find yourself completely infatuated with a person, looping through fantasies of their brilliance, their freedom, or their creative fire, you are experiencing the projection of your golden shadow. You have met an individual who is living out loud a quality that you have locked away in the basement of your own soul. Instead of doing the difficult spiritual work of cultivating that freedom or creativity within yourself, your ego takes the lazy route. It attempts to possess the person who embodies it. Buddhism addresses this mechanism with clinical precision through the practice of yoniso manasakara-wise, radical attention. When a person dominates your mind through the mechanism of shadow projection, the contemplative tradition instructs you to immediately cease looking at their actions and begin examining your own reactions. The insight of the mirror. The intensity of your reaction to another human being is a direct, mathematical measurement of your own lack of internal integration. If you are entirely neutral toward a trait, you can see it clearly without your mind looping around it. If your mind is fixated, you are looking into a mirror of your own exiled soul. Catalyst 5. Fixation on outcome and the fantasy of the closed circle. A significant percentage of mental haunting is driven by the ego's absolute intolerance for narrative incompleteness. The human mind is fundamentally a meaning-making machine that craves structured arcs, a beginning, a middle, and a clean, unambiguous resolution. When a relationship dissolves messily, or when an interaction ends without validation, closure, or justice, the ego experiences this asymmetry as a form of cognitive agony. To alleviate this discomfort, the mind constructs an internal simulator, It drags the image of the person into your consciousness and begins to stage elaborate, imaginary scenarios designed to provide the missing closure. These mental movies are deeply addictive because they provide a transient, neurological hit of satisfaction. For a fleeting second, inside the safety of your skull, your ego feels vindicated, powerful, and seen. But because the simulation is a phantom, the satisfaction evaporates the moment the movie ends, leaving you face to face with the reality that nothing has changed. The mind, desperate for another hit of vindication, immediately hits the rewind button and runs the simulation again. Buddhism cuts through this addiction by revealing the ultimate illusion of external closure. The Buddha taught that true peace nirvana can never be dependent on the rearrangement of external conditions. As long as you believe that your mental freedom requires a specific configuration of words to exit another person's mouth, you are a spiritual slave. You are voluntarily remaining in a cage, waiting for your captor to come back and unlock the door. The practice here is the radical abandonment of the outcome itself. It is the recognition that the circle does not need to be closed by them. You close the circle unilaterally by accepting the raw, asymmetrical reality of what happened, refusing to finance the internal simulator for even one more frame. Tactical interventions, the advanced toolkit. To move from intellectual comprehension of these catalysts to the experiential reality of freedom, we must now deploy the highly structured mental protocols developed within the monastic training systems. These are not comforting psychological platitudes, they are surgical interventions designed to disrupt the neural and psychic tracks of long-term obsession. Intervention 1. Mental noting and cognitive disidentification. When a mind is untrained, it operates in a state of absolute identification with its contents. If a thought about the person arises, you do not see the thought as a transient mental phenomenon, you become the thought. You jump directly onto the train of association and ride it for miles into the wilderness of anxiety before realizing you have even left the station. The practice of Vitakavakara mental noting or labeling acts as an immediate emergency brake on this process. It inserts a crucial wedge of consciousness between the observer and the observed. The protocol, the precise instant the image, name, or memory of the person enters your conscious field, you must immediately apply a flat, clinical, two-word label to the process. You must speak this label internally with the tone of a neutral court reporter. If your mind is replaying a scene from the past, label it remembering. Remembering. If your mind is drafting a future conversation or text message, label it planning. Planning. If your mind is constructing an imaginary scenario of validation, label it fantasizing. Fantasizing. If your mind is weighing their faults against your virtues, label it judging. Judging. The strategic rules of noting. Never use their name as the label. If you say John, you trigger the entire emotional web associated with that entity. You must label the cognitive process, not the content. Repeat the label twice. This slows down the high-speed velocity of the thought wheel. Maintain a tone of absolute neutrality. If you label a thought with anger or frustration, obsessing again, you have simply initiated a secondary loop of self-judgment. The label must be as objective as a scientist noting a cellular mutation. By executing this practice hundreds of times a day, you systematically retrain your brain. You begin to see that the person haunting you is not actually a massive, solid reality dominating your life. They are merely a series of brief, electrical impulse temporary pixels flashing across the screen of your awareness. The screen is permanent, the pixels are entirely insignificant. Intervention 2. The radical weaponization of loving kindness. The average person believes that the fastest way to stop thinking about an ex-partner or an enemy is to cultivate intense hatred, disgust, or cold indifference toward them. They delete photographs, block phone numbers, and repeatedly list the person's flaws to convince themselves they are over it. Contemplative science reveals that this strategy is a profound psychological failure. Hatred is not the opposite of love. Hatred is simply the negative polarization of attachment. When you hate someone, you are still completely invested in their narrative. Your aversion binds you to them just as tightly as your lust ever did. You are still carrying them in your mind, but instead of holding them in a velvet glove, you are clutching them with a jagged iron fist, lacerating your own interior world in the process. The only way to achieve absolute energetic severance is through the deployment of meta-radical goodwill. This is not an act of weak, sentimental fluff. It is a calculated, cold-blooded act of spiritual self-defense. You do not offer metta to be a good person, or to bless the individual who harmed you. You offer metta to unilaterally burn down the bridges of aversion that are keeping their ghost anchored to your heart. The strategic protocol: sit in a quiet space, close your eyes, and allow the exact image of the person who haunts your thoughts to materialize before you. Notice the immediate contraction of anxiety or anger in your body. Breathe into that contraction. Hold your seat and look directly into their eyes within your mind. Force yourself to recite the 4 traditional metta phrases, directing them explicitly toward this specific person. May you be truly happy. May you be free from internal and external suffering. May you be safe from harm. May you live your life with absolute ease, deconstructing the internal resistance. The moment you attempt this, your ego will rise up in fierce rebellion. It will scream, "Why should I wish happiness to someone who lied to me? Why should I bless someone who threw my love away?" You must answer your ego with absolute clarity. I am wishing them well so that they become so full, so complete, and so satisfied that they have absolutely no reason to ever cross into my mind again. You are giving them away. You are wishing them so much abundance that their energetic signature naturally detaches from your lack. By wishing them freedom from suffering, you are systematically dissolving the toxic cords of resentment that have kept your minds locked in an endless, subterranean wrestling match. You are cutting the anchor. You are declaring that you are no longer willing to sacrifice your present moment awareness on the altar of past historical grievances. You release them to the universe, and in doing so, you step out of the prison of your own obsessive making, the deep shift into ultimate consciousness, moving the flashlight of attention to the field of awareness. To achieve the final, permanent resolution of mental haunting, the practitioner must undergo a profound paradigm shift regarding the nature of identity itself. This is the ultimate peak of Buddhist psychology. Transition from identifying as the content of mind to resting as the space of mind. An untrained mind experiences life exclusively through the narrow beam of attention. Attention is like a flashlight in a pitch-black room. Whichever object the beam hits becomes your entire reality. If the flashlight hits a terrifying memory of betrayal, your entire world is terror and betrayal. If it hits an anxious fantasy of future loneliness, your entire universe becomes anxiety and loneliness. The practice of liberation is the process of realizing that you are not the flashlight beam. You are the vast, open, luminous space of the room itself, which contains both the flashlight and the objects it illuminates. The individual you cannot stop thinking about is not a monster that has conquered your mind. They are simply a tiny piece of broken furniture, sitting inside the vast warehouse of your consciousness. They have no power to diminish the warehouse. They cannot damage the walls of your true awareness. When their image arises, do not try to turn the flashlight away. Instead, expand your vision. Look around the edges of the thought. Notice the quiet, silent space that surrounds the memory. Recognize that the part of you that knows you are thinking about them is completely untouched by the thought. The witness of the obsession is not obsessed. The knower of the pain is not in pain. Anchor your identity firmly in that wide-open, unmoving witness, and allow the traffic of the mind to pass by like cars on a distant highway, mapping your evolutionary metrics. As you systematically commit to this high-level contemplative work, it is vital to understand that progress is rarely linear, and it almost never manifests as total, instantaneous amnesia. The expectation that a deeply significant human being will completely vanish from your memory banks overnight is a delusion that breeds unnecessary frustration. In the advanced stages of Buddhist psychological training, we measure emotional liberation not by the absence of the thought, but by the radical alteration of our relationship to it. The 3 diagnostic metrics of growing freedom. To accurately track your liberation from the mental phantom, look for these 3 subtle shifts in your daily consciousness. 1. The velocity of recovery, the catch time. In the initial stages of obsession, you can be caught in an unconscious loop for hours, or even days before realizing you have been pulled under. You lose yourself in an imaginary argument with the person while driving, arrive at your destination, and realize you have no memory of the journey. As your mindfulness muscle strengthens, the catch time shrinks dramatically. You notice the phantom within minutes, then within seconds, and eventually, you see the very first seed of the thought attempting to sprout from the subconscious, and you disidentify with it before it can hijack your neurological system. 2. The attenuation of the somatic charge. When the memory first gained its haunting power, its arrival was accompanied by a violent chemical shock to the physical form, an immediate dropping sensation in the stomach, a tightening of the lungs, a surge of adrenaline. The true metric of progress is when the image of the person arises on the screen of your mind, but your physical body remains completely cool, spacious, and relaxed. The movie is playing, but the amplifier has been unplugged. The thought is present, but its capacity to cause suffering has been neutralized. 3. The shift from grievance to grateful receptivity. This is the ultimate signature of spiritual mastery. As long as the memory of the person triggers a desire to escape, a surge of anger, or a wave of self-pity, you are still in school. The day you can look at their image in your mind and feel an unprompted, quiet surge of gratitude for the sheer brutality of the lessons they forced you to learn the day. You realize that their exit or their betrayal was the exact fire required to burn away your codependency and awaken your sovereignty. That is the day the phantom permanently loses its chains. They are no longer your captor. They are simply a historical agent who unwittingly served your highest evolution. The mechanics of habitual resonance. When a cognitive loop survives both initial somatic tracking and active disidentification, it enters the domain of what classical Abhidhamma philosophy calls vasanati, subtle, deeply grooved behavioral imprints or psychological residual tracks left behind by repeated actions. Even after an emotion has been intellectually processed and the primary karmic lesson extracted, the mind can continue to generate the phantom out of sheer neurological momentum. The groove in the consciousness has been dug so deeply by past repetitive thoughts that the psychic current automatically funnels into it by default. Understanding the neural trails of obsession. To effectively collapse these residual loops, the practitioner must stop treating the phantom as a living relational problem and begin treating it as a mechanical habit of attention. Every time your mind historically spent hours actively dwelling on this person, it was laying down internal scaffolding. In Buddhist psychology, this is described as the conditioning of the Chittasantana, the mind stream. If you have walked a specific path through a dense forest 5,000 times, the vegetation is completely obliterated. A clear, effortless highway is established. If you do not consciously intervene, your focus will naturally choose that highway because it presents the path of least energetic resistance. The practice at this level requires the systematic cultivation of yoniso manasikara, radical, root-directed attention. You must stop analyzing who you are thinking about and begin tracking when and how the mind chooses to deploy the flashlight of its attention toward that worn path. The architecture of triggers and contextual arising. Nothing in the cosmos arises in isolation. The phantom that appears to ambush your mind out of nowhere is actually the final link in a highly structured, hidden chain of cause and effect. This is the core principle of paticcasamuppada, dependent origination. When this exists, that comes to be with the arising of this that arises. To dismantle the involuntary manifestation of the memory, you must become an expert tracker of the initial links in the causal chain. The phantom does not manifest randomly. It is summoned by specific environmental, physical, or emotional precursors. Diagnostic mapping of causal links. Through intensive self-observation, you must map the 3 primary classes of triggers that activate the residual groove. Somatic vulnerability states. Track the physical condition of your organism when the loops activate. You will frequently find that the phantom does not appear when you are highly engaged, biologically vibrant, and fully rested. It emerges during moments of low physical voltage accompanying late-night fatigue, physical exhaustion, low blood sugar, or subtle bodily illness. The mind, misinterpreting a basic biological drop in energy as emotional despair, accesses the most familiar historical script of despair. It possesses the memory of that person. Emotional undercurrents. Often what appears to be a sudden obsession with a past partner or enemy is actually a displacement of current emotional friction. If you experience an unrecognized failure, a moment of acute loneliness, or professional anxiety in your present world reality, the ego will frequently refuse to confront that immediate vulnerability. Instead, it shifts the focus backward, projecting the discomfort onto the historical relationship. It is far easier for the ego to mourn a past heartbreak it already understands than to confront the terrifying uncertainty of its present life. Environmental anchors. Consciousness is deeply spatial and associative. A specific ambient temperature, the scent of rain on dry asphalt, a particular key signature in a piece of music, or even the geometric layout of a room can act as a silent sensory key that unlocks the subterranean vaults of vasana. By mapping these links, you shift from a state of passive victimization to one of scientific overview. The next time the memory arises, you do not say, "I am still broken over this person." You say clearly, "Ah, my body is highly fatigued, and the ambient environment contains a sensory anchor." The mind is simply selecting its default habit trail to process this transient physical low, the advanced protocols of non-engagement. To dry up the waters of vasana, we must employ the definitive strategies of non-engagement outlined by classical Zen and Theravada monastic disciplines. These practices are designed to strip the thought wheel of its evolutionary momentum by refusing to provide it with the one currency it requires to survive: conscious reaction. The protocol of bare attention. The human mind behaves exactly like a mirror. A mirror allows whatever object stands before it, whether it is a beautiful flower or a decaying corpsito, be perfectly reflected within its field. The mirror does not contract in disgust when the corpse appears. It does not reach out to grasp the flower when it stands before the glass. It possesses no preferences, no judgments, and no bias. Furthermore, when the object moves away, the mirror retains absolutely no trace, no shadow, and no memory of its presence. It remains perfectly clear, luminous, and undisturbed. The practice of bare attention is the deliberate cultivation of this mirror-like quality of consciousness in relation to your own thoughts. The execution strategy. When the phantom manifests on the screen of your consciousness, you must consciously refuse to initiate any secondary mental action. Do not suppress the thought. Do not try to push it out of your head, change the channel, or override it with an affirmation. Pushing the cloud away implies you believe the cloud has the power to damage the sky. Do not indulge the thought. Do not follow the narrative. Analyze the underlying meaning, or enter the internal debate. Maintain the stance of the witness. Simply sit back and observe the thought exactly as it eyes a passing configuration of cognitive energy. Witness it with the exact same detached curiosity you would look at a cloud drifting across the sky or a stranger passing by your window on the street below. Say to yourself internally, "Thinking is happening. The image of this person is present. Allow it to stand in your awareness. Allow it to be as heavy, as sharp, or as persistent as it wants to be." By remaining perfectly still and unreactive, you are denying the thought pattern the vital fuel of your reaction. A fire cannot burn without oxygen. A mental phantom cannot endure without your interest, your fear, or your anger. When it discovers that it can no longer provoke you into a reaction, the wave of energy naturally hits its peak, exhausts its momentum, and recedes back into the vast ocean of your unmoving awareness, the paradigm of the distant highway. To anchor this practice during moments of acute cognitive intensity, visualize your consciousness as a quiet hill, overlooking a busy multi-lane highway. The thoughts, memories, and images of the person you cannot stop thinking about are simply cars passing by on the blacktop below. An untrained person behaves like someone who stands in the middle of the highway, attempting to chase down specific cars, jump onto their bumpers, or physically wrestle them to a standstill. They are repeatedly run over, bruised, and exhausted by the sheer volume of the traffic. The masterclass instruction is simple. Stay on the hill. Let the traffic pass. A bright red sports car representing a highly charged sexual memory drives by. Let it pass. A heavy dark semi-truck representing an intense grievance or betrayal drives by. Let it pass. You do not need to build a wall to block the highway. You do not need to clear the road of cars. The highway has a right to exist, and the traffic has a right to move. Your only assignment is to maintain your seat on the quiet hill of the witness, watching the vehicles appear, travel down the asphalt and vanish over the distant horizon. The architecture of the void emptiness and the dissolution of separation. At the absolute zenith of Buddhist psychological liberation lies the shattering realization of sunyata emptiness. All suffering, all emotional obsession, and all relational trauma are structurally dependent on a profound metaphysical illusion. The belief in two separate, solid, and independently existing entities. The ego constructs a terrifyingly rigid binary architecture. I am a separate self in here, trapped behind my eyes, and there are a separate self out there, who holds the power to destroy my peace, grant me validation, or break my heart. As long as this dualistic paradigm remains unexamined, total freedom is impossible. You will always be a small, vulnerable object navigating a world of external, threatening objects, deconstructing the solid reality of the ghost. The definitive breakthrough occurs when you bring your meditation down to the microscopic level of immediate experience and turn the lens of inquiry onto the phantom itself. When you sit in deep stillness, look straight into the center of the phantom's face within your mind. Ask yourself this radical question: what is this thing actually made of? If you look with absolute, unflinching honesty, you will discover an astonishing reality. The person you are obsessing over does not exist inside your head. There is no physical flesh, no solid bone, and no living person sitting inside your skull. What you are actually encountering is a fluid, transient composite of three entirely empty components, a collection of brief, flickering mental pixels, visual imagery, a series of internal auditory echoes, memories of their voice, a localized wave of physical pressure or biological heat in your nervous system. None of these components are solid. None of them are permanent. None of them possess any independent, inherent existence. They are completely empty phenomena arising out of nothingness, changing color and intensity second by second, and vanishing back into the void. They are exactly like the reflections of clouds cast upon the surface of a pristine mountain lake. The lake reflects the cloud perfectly, but the water does not become heavy. It does not become wet from the cloud, and it cannot be torn by the storm. When you realize that the phantom haunting you is entirely empty of solid reality, the structural tension of the obsession collapses. You realize you have been fighting a shadow, wrestling with a ghost, and attempting to lock up smoke. The illusion of the solid other dissolves into the wide-open, crystalline space of your true consciousness, the deep realization of not-self. Simultaneously, the lens of inquiry must be turned inward upon the one who is suffering. Ask this ultimate question: who is the I that cannot stop thinking about this person? Where is the permanent, solid self that is haunted by this memory? When you search for the thinker behind the thoughts, you will find absolutely nothing permanent. You will find a shifting river of sensations, a changing stream of perceptions, a volatile landscape of emotions, and a continuous flow of consciousness. There is no solid, separate captain sitting at the wheel of the ship. The self is a fluid, dynamic process in open sky that is continuously changing its weather. This is the birth of true spiritual liberation, Anatta. If there is no solid, permanent me in here, and no solid, permanent them out there, then the entire matrix of the haunting loses its foundational anchors. The bridge collapses because the pillars on both sides of the river have been revealed to be empty illusions. What remains is only the vast, unblemished, and radiant field of absolute awareness itself, wide open, beautifully cool, and entirely free. Within this supreme awareness, thoughts may still float by like tiny birds crossing an infinite sky, but they leave absolutely no path, cause no friction, and can never for a single second disturb your pristine, eternal peace. The integration of the liberated mind, resting in the aftermath of realization, when the structural foundations of mental fixation have been thoroughly deconstructed through somatic tracking, causal mapping, bare attention, and the deep insight of sunyata, the practitioner enters the final stage of the path, the landscape of non-dual integration. This is the experiential embodiment of what the classical Zen masters described as the state of wui, effortless action and mushin no mind. You no longer need to perform techniques. You no longer need to execute strategic protocols. You have transcended the identity of the worker who is trying to heal, and you have stepped completely into the reality of the healing itself, the sublime paradox of absolute release. At this advanced coordinate of development, A beautiful, sublime paradox manifests within your consciousness. For months, or perhaps years, your primary goal was the complete eradication of the thought pattern. You wanted the memory of the person gone. You wanted the history erased. You wanted to reach a state of absolute amnesia regarding the pain. But inside the space of true liberation, you realize that the ultimate victory is not the absence of the memory, but the total removal of your fear of its presence. The memory of the person can float across your mind during a quiet moment. Their face can appear vividly in a dream, or their name can be spoken by a mutual acquaintance in social conversation, and your interior world remains as still as an old stone deep within the earth. You no longer rush to push the image away. You no longer grasp at it to check if it still hurts. You look at it with a quiet, gentle nod of recognition, the way an old warrior looks at a scar received in a battle fought a lifetime ago. The scar is part of the skin's history, but it has completely lost its capacity to bleed, the final horizon of relational transformation. When you rest as this sky-like awareness, the ultimate nature of the relationship itself undergoes a cosmic transmutation. You realize that the individual who haunted your thoughts was never actually an actor in a personal tragedy to break your heart. They were a profound, evolutionary instrument summoned by the deep wisdom of your own soul to shatter your illusions of permanence, to burn away your patterns of neurotic attachment, and to force you onto the path of absolute spiritual sovereignty. You look back at the entire trajectory of the haunting, the sleepless nights, the violent internal arguments, the agonized tracking of somatic contractions, and you see it clearly as the sacred, alchemical fire required to cook the raw elements of your ego into the pure gold of enlightened presence. The individual who refused to leave your mind did not do so out of malice or random psychological cruelty. They stayed because they were under a spiritual mandate to remain until they had finished delivering every single drop of the wisdom code you required to awaken. With this realization, the final remnants of grievance dissolve into an unprompted, luminous field of cosmic compassion. You wish them well on their own journey through the shifting landscapes of cyclic existence samsara. You release them fully, without a single tether of expectation, judgment, or debt remaining between your hearts. The door of the prison stands wide open, revealing that it was never locked. You step out into the infinite, sunlit horizon of the present moment, completely whole, beautifully sovereign, and fundamentally free. The anatomy of subconscious echoes. When a mind has progressed through somatic tracking, causal mapping, bare attention, and the ultimate realization of emptiness sunyata, it enters a highly refined phase of psychological purification. Yet, even at this advanced junction, practitioners frequently encounter a confusing phenomenon: the sudden, ghost-like re-emergence of the phantom after weeks or months of absolute clarity. You believe you are completely free. The somatic charge has been neutralized. The internal simulations have been permanently closed, and you have rested comfortably as the vast sky-like space of awareness. Then, out of nowhere, an exceptionally vivid dream, a sudden waking flash of memory, or a wave of unprovoked emotional longing washes over you. The unmanaged ego immediately panics. It declares, "I have relapsed. The spiritual work was a failure. The attachment is just as deep as it ever was." Buddhist psychological science exposes this panic as a profound misunderstanding of how deep conditioning is systematically cleared from the consciousness. What you are experiencing is not a relapse, it is the natural, necessary structural emptying of the deepest subterranean vaults of the alaya vijnana, the storehouse consciousness, the architecture of the final exhaustion. In the advanced stages of contemplative development, these sudden, erratic reemergences are classified as samskara vidhamsati, shattering or exhaustion of the deep-seated karmic seeds. To illustrate this process, consider the physical metaphor of a deep, ancient stone well that has been filled with toxic water for decades. When you first begin pumping the water out of the well, you easily clear the top layers of active mental traffic and daily obsessive narratives. As you go deeper, you siphon off the thick, heavy emotional sediment of unprocessed grief and anger through somatic tracking. Eventually, the well appears completely empty. Dry, clean stone is revealed. However, deep within the microscopic pores and foundational fissures of the bedrock, tiny, pressurized pockets of the old water remain trapped. As the overall pressure of the well drops due to your practice of spacious awareness, these hidden, subterranean gas pockets suddenly burst, releasing their trapped contents to the surface all at once. This is exactly what is happening when the phantom returns after a long period of pristine clarity. It is not the generation of a new obsession. It is the final evacuation of the old buried residue. The mind is scraping the very bottom of its karmic barrel. If you can maintain absolute stillness during this final clearing, refusing to spin a new story about the reemergence, these buried deposits will exhaust their energetic charge within moments, leaving the bedrock of your awareness permanently clean, polished, and free. The yoga of dream deconstruction, Svapna mindfulness. As the waking mind becomes increasingly spacious and unshakable, the residual energy of relational fixation will frequently retreat into the only domain left open to it, the dreaming consciousness. Practitioners who experience absolute sovereignty over their thoughts during their waking hours often find themselves ambushed by intense, emotionally devastating encounters with the phantom during the night. You wake up at 3 a.m. with a racing heart, your pillow damp with tears, having just spent what felt like hours reconciling, arguing, or begging for love inside a vivid dream state. The raw realism of these nocturnal visitations can leave a lingering psychic fog over your entire waking day. The monastic protocol for dream integration. Tibetan dream yoga and classical Buddhist psychology provide a brilliant, precise framework for neutralizing these nighttime ambushes. The instruction begins with a radical reframing of the dream state itself. A dream is not a message from the universe telling you to go back to the person. It is a direct visualization of your own subconscious plumbing system, cleansing itself. When the physical body enters deep rest and the analytical prefrontal cortex turns off, the manas, the instinctive mind, utilizes the vast warehouse of your memory banks to create symbolic dramas designed to process unexpressed energetic tensions. If the phantom appears in your dream, they are not acting as an external soul capsule. They are a character entirely manufactured out of your own psychic fabric. To systematically collapse the dream loop, deploy the following 3-step protocol immediately upon waking. The immediate reclassification. The moment your eyes open from a dream involving the phantom, do not lie in bed analyzing the plotline. Why did they hug me? What does it mean that they were walking away? Instantly label the entire dream as subconscious venting, empty imagery. Recognize that the plot is entirely irrelevant. It is simply a colorful wrapper around a bubble of raw, discharging energy. Somatic extraction of the nocturnal fog. Do not leave your bed immediately. Stay perfectly still on your back and locate where the emotional residue of the dream is sitting in your waking flesh. Feel the heavy ache in the center of the chest or the hollow panic in the stomach. Breathe directly into it, applying the exact same somatic tracking protocol outlined in volume. You are catching the dream's energy at the border of the waking world and dissolving it before it can harden into a daytime mood, the morning meta-dissolution. Before your feet touch the floor, mentally direct a sharp, clear wave of loving kindness metta toward the dream character you just encountered. Say internally, may the fragment of my own mind that took your form in the night be completely happy, whole, and free. By doing this, you instantly claim ownership of the projection, strip it of its externalized power, and fold the energy back into the unified field of your own sovereign heart. The Bodhisattva shift, transforming pain into universal compassion. The ultimate evolution of the masterclass requires a complete breakdown of the ego's self-centered orientation toward its own emotional pain. As long as you approach the problem of persistent thoughts through the lens of, how do I get over my ex? How do I fix my broken heart? You are operating within a highly constricted psychological framework. You are treating your pain as an isolated personal tragedy. Buddhism offers a spectacular, transpersonal exit from this isolation through the practice of Tonglen, sending and taking, a profound method from the Mahayana tradition, designed to turn the sharpest daggers of personal suffering into a golden oil of universal compassion. The strategic alchemy of Tonglen. The next time the phantom enters your consciousness and triggers a wave of acute emotional agony, a sudden ache of loneliness, or a crushing weight of rejection, do not run away from the sensation. Do not try to soothe yourself. Instead, stand absolute in your posture. Widen your chest and execute this fierce alchemical protocol, the inhalation of the collective wound. As you draw a deep, slow breath into your body, look straight into the raw ache of your heartbreak. Intentionally imagine that you are breathing in not just your own personal pain, but the identical heartbreak, the identical obsession, and the identical agony of every single human being across the planet who is currently sitting in a room crying over someone who abandoned them. Breathe it in as a thick, dark, smoky cloud, directly into the furnace of your heart, the intimate realization. Say to yourself as you hold the breath for a split second, this pain is not uniquely mine. This is the timeless, universal human experience of attachment and loss. I am not an isolated casualty. I am a living conduit for the collective heart of humanity. The exhalation of radiant space. As you exhale slowly and smoothly, visualize that the diamond-like purity of your own true awareness instantly processes that dark cloud, transforming it into a radiant, brilliant light of absolute relief, cooling space, and unconditional peace. Intentionally breathe this golden light out across the cosmos, sending it like a soothing balm to every lonely bedroom, every silent monastery, and every fractured home where a human heart is currently caught in the agonizing wheels of obsession. The psychological results of this practice are staggering. The absolute instant you shift your orientation from trying to escape your personal suffering to voluntarily absorbing the collective suffering of humanity, your personal pain completely loses its capacity to crush you. The egoic contract is broken. Your heart is no longer a small, fragile porcelain cup trapped in a tiny relational drama. It expands into an infinite, oceanic cathedral capable of holding the entire universe's grief without breaking the phantom. Discovering that its presence no longer causes localized contraction but instead triggers an explosion of universal compassion is instantly neutralized. It has no more work to do. It dissolves into the light of the very compassion it forced you to awaken, the absolute dimension resting as the primordial ground. Beyond the final threshold, you have navigated the 7 catalysts, mastered somatic tracking, neutralized contextual triggers, deconstructed dream projections, and transformed personal grief into universal medicine. You have arrived at the final terminal coordinate of the path, the primordial ground of the unconditioned asankata Dhamma. At this altitude of realization, there are no more tools to deploy because there is no longer any illusion of a worker separate from the universe. You have stepped out of the stream of time entirely. You look back at the entire historical narrative of the relationship that once defined your existence dates, the betrayals, the exquisite highs, the subterranean depressions, and you realize it is as insubstantial as a line drawn on the surface of water. The past has absolutely no objective existence anywhere in the cosmos. It exists only as a faint, electrical shadow appearing on the screen of the absolute now. The individual you could not stop thinking about is revealed to be nothing less than a divine actor, a sacred phantom sent by the absolute intelligence of your true nature to drive you completely out of your mind and straight into your heart. They played their part flawlessly. They refused to leave your head until you had no choice but to discover that you are not a fragile person navigating a threatening world, but the boundless, luminous, and indestructible awareness in which entire universes are born, dance, and dissolve. Stand still in this pristine realization. Let the traffic of the cosmos move as it will. You are the infinite sky. You are the unmoving stone. You are the primordial ground. The masterclass is complete. The doors are gone. You are and have always been entirely and absolutely free. The mechanics of relational residue. Even after the deep subterranean vaults of the storehouse consciousness alaya vijnana have initiated their final evacuation, and the conscious ego has surrendered its narrative arcs, the human organism can experience a subtle structural friction known as kleshavasanath habitual scent or residual perfume of long-standing emotional afflictions. Ancient monastic treatises note that even when a large fire is completely extinguished and the ash has turned cold, the room that hosted the conflagration will retain the scent of smoke for a long season. In this advanced phase of stabilization, the phantom no longer appears as a coherent narrative or a terrifying psychological intruder. Instead, it manifests as a vague ambient atmosphere, a sudden, unprovoked shift in your morning energy, a brief constriction in the throat when passing a specific geographical coordinate, or a transient wave of melancholy that possesses no intellectual justification. The danger at this interface is the ego's tendency to recontaminate the field. The ego, encountering the faint scent of smoke, immediately assumes the house is burning down again. It rushes to manufacture a brand new story to account for the transient mood shift. It asks, does this mean the healing was incomplete? Am I destined to carry this imprint forever? Buddhist contemplative science instructs you to meet this residual perfume, not with aggressive countermeasures, but with the practice of pure radiance, prabhasvarachit, allowing the inherent, natural warmth of your baseline awareness to bleach the fabric of the mind clean over time, without your intervention. The yoga of environmental decoupling. Consciousness does not operate in a vacuum. It is radically embedded within the sensory sphere's ayatanathis, structural intersections between your internal sense organs and the external world. A significant volume of what we misinterpret as internal psychological obsession is actually the mechanical result of environmental anchoring. Your physical living space, your digital interfaces, and your daily geographic routines have become saturated with the historical energy of the connection. Every text thread, every shared piece of furniture, every specific route taken through a city. City Street acts as an external hard drive storing fragments of the phantom's identity. When your senses interface with these external anchors, they automatically pull the corresponding mental file into your prefrontal cortex, completely bypassing your conscious intentions, the monastic protocol for spatial purification. To break this automated loop, the practitioner must execute ayatana sudaith, radical decoupling and purification of the sensory fields. This is not an act of cowardly avoidance or bitter avoidance. It is the conscious, tactical re-engineering of your physical reality to support the mind's natural stabilization. The tactical disruption of the digital sphere. The modern smartphone is the ultimate machine for generating psychological ghosts. To allow an open digital archive of a past relationship to exist in your pocket is equivalent to sleeping in a graveyard and wondering why you are visited by phantoms. You must execute a complete digital extraction. Archive or permanently remove communication logs. Strip your algorithms of tracking inputs and eliminate the micro-reminders that keep your nervous system in a state of low-grade vigilance. The structural rearrangement of living space. If your physical home remains configured in the exact geometric layout that hosted the relationship's decline, your eyes are continuously drinking in the past. You must alter the physical environment. Change the orientation of your bed. Introduce new color spectrums through textiles. Clear out items that possess strong historical resonance and allow fresh air and sunlight to penetrate the rooms. You are consciously erasing the spatial matrix that the memory uses to anchor itself. The intentional alteration of daily geography. If your mind automatically enters an anxious loop whenever you walk down a specific street or visit a particular market, your behavior has mapped that route as a trauma trail. You must intentionally choose new pathways, explore unfamiliar neighborhoods, and establish fresh geographic associations. By introducing your senses to entirely new vistas, aromas, and sounds, you deprive the old vasana of its environmental scaffolding, allowing the mind to return to its pristine, unconditioned present-moment baseline. The transition to the non-dual witness. As the environmental tethers are severed and the residual scent of smoke naturally clears from the interior space, the practitioner approaches the final ultimate horizon of the masterclass, the realization of sahajanyanath, innate, co-emergent knowing. At this profound altitude of development, you drop the very concept of practicing. You abandon the dualistic vocabulary of tools, interventions, and protocols. You realize that the entire structure of the journey, the idea of a haunted mind trying to reach a liberated mind, was the ultimate, necessary illusion of the path. You look closely at the phantom one final time, and you see that it is not separate from the fabric of your own awareness. The thought of them, the pain of their absence, the memory of their touch, these are not external stones dropped into the lake of your mind. They are the water of the lake itself, rising up as a wave. A wave is not an enemy to the ocean, it is simply the ocean in motion. When you rest as this unified, non-dual field of consciousness, the phantom loses its capacity to haunt you because there is no longer an isolated self inside your chest for the ghost to cling to. You have become the sky, the road, the air, and the light. The memory of the person is held within your absolute presence, fully integrated, entirely loved, and beautifully, permanently free. Final contemplative transmission. You have traveled through the entire architecture of the haunted mind. You have dismantled the illusions of control, mapped the deep forces of karma and shadow projection, mastered the arts of somatic tracking and bare attention, and crossed the final threshold into the vast primordial ground of emptiness. Remember this final truth as you step back into the ordinary rhythm of your days. The individual who won't leave your head was never your executioner. They were your ultimate, divinely appointed liberator. They stayed inside your consciousness because they were under a sacred mandate to lock you in an internal furnace until you had absolutely no choice but to burn away your codependency, drop your attachments to temporary forms, and realize your own absolute spiritual sovereignty. They were the friction required to wake you up from the dream of separation. Look at their memory now inside the wide, cool space of your heart. See them clearly, strip them of all historical blame, and grant them absolute, unconditional release. They have finished their work. You have finished your training. The well is clean, the sky is clear, and you are, in this very breath, permanently, beautifully, and structurally free. Go forward in peace, resting effortlessly as the luminous awareness that is your eternal birthright, the layered subconscious and the residue of time, while the foundational matrix of environmental triggers ayatana and conscious habits vasana has been systematically mapped and dismantled. The human psyche possesses a final, highly defended layer of defensive insulation. In the deep text traditions of the classical yogic and Buddhist phenomenological systems, this is known as the Sankara Kosath literal sheath, cocoon, or vault, constructed out of deeply compressed relational memories. When a relationship has dominated your internal life for years, it does not simply exist as a file inside your memory bank. It actively alters the structural geometry of your subconscious mind. It constructs an internalized, simulated version of the other persona psychic entity that lives within your thought architecture, continuously commenting on your choices, judging your career transitions, and casting an invisible shadow over your new creative endeavors. To complete the masterclass and ensure absolute, permanent liberation, we must enter these final deep chambers of the psyche. We must systematically dismantle the lingering linguistic patterns within the mind stream citta, and dissolve the final biological contractions stored within the physical body kaya, the deconstruction of the internalized dialogue. When an individual has occupied your thoughts for an extended duration, the haunting ceases to be purely visual or emotional, it becomes deeply textual. You develop an unconscious, ongoing internal monologue with the phantom. Even when you are entirely alone, your mind is continuously explaining itself to them, defending its lifestyle choices, proving its current success, or seeking their unspoken approval. In Buddhist cognitive science, this verbal proliferation is called papankath, conceptual mapping of reality driven by the ego's projections. This internal dialogue is highly addictive because it allows you to maintain a simulated connection with the person without having to face the cold reality of their absence. It keeps the relationship alive as a linguistic construct inside your head. The monastic protocol for auditory extraction. To systematically silence this internal dialogue, you must apply the practice of Vaksankara Nirodha, deliberate cessation of verbal mental formations. Acoustic identification. The next time you catch your mind engaging in an internal argument or explanation directed toward the phantom, freeze the frame. Do not focus on the content of what you are saying. Focus on the acoustic quality of the voice. Is it rapid? Is it defensive? Where does it reverberate inside your skull? Semantic stripping. Treat the words exactly like empty sound data. If the mind says, "I will show them how well I am doing," do not engage with the ambition. Strip the words of their meaning. Realize that these phrases are merely passing vibrations of cognitive energeno, more significant than the sound of wind rustling through dry leaves or traffic passing on a distant street. The return to the primordial gap. Turn your attention away from the words and direct it toward the literal silence that exists before, during, and after every phrase. Every word requires a background of silence to be perceived. Anchor your entire consciousness firmly within that pristine, unmoving gap of silence. When the voice realizes it can no longer provoke an internal response, its momentum collapses, and the dialogue dissolves back into the quiet field of awareness. The dissolution of cellular memory, the final and most stubborn defense of the relational phantom, is not located in the brain. It is stored within the bioenergetic tissue of the physical organism. In the classical Tantrum and Abhidhamma frameworks, these are known as Kayaganthi physical knots or cellular contractions left behind by deep emotional impacts. Your nervous system possesses an impeccable memory. It stores the energetic imprint of the touch, the shock of the betrayal, and the heavy physical pattern of the grief long after your conscious intellect has moved on. These cellular knots act as tiny automated radios, broadcasting a low-grade frequency of lack, anxiety, or resentment throughout your physical form. The protocol for complete somatic evacuation. To permanently clear these cellular imprints, you must execute a deep meditative sweep of the physical form, utilizing the body as an alchemical furnace. The systemic somatic sweep. Sit in a position of absolute alignment. Close your eyes and allow your awareness to slowly move through the physical landscape of your flesh, from the crown of the head down to the tips of the toes. Look specifically for dense, cold, or highly pressurized bioenergetic knots that feel structurally linked to the history of the relationship, the breath of dissolution. Once you locate a knot, whether it is a heavy constriction behind the shoulder blades, a cold numbness in the solar plexus, or a tight armoring around the jaw, bring your entire breath baseline directly to that coordinate. Widen your breath. Imagine that each inhalation is introducing a warm, spacious, and highly oxygenated current of pure awareness straight into the center of the cellular knot, the release of pure presence. As you exhale, do not try to push the tension away. Grant the knot absolute, unconditional permission to expand, soften, and unravel at its own organic pace. You are consciously reclaiming your physical form. You are stripping the memory of its physiological real estate, ensuring that every cell, every nerve, and every muscle fiber is returned to its natural state of unblemished, sovereign presence, the horizon of total luminescence. Having thoroughly dismantled the internal dialogue, cleared the environmental anchors, deconstructed the dream matrices, and dissolved the final cellular knots within the flesh, you cross the final absolute threshold of the masterclass. You enter the experiential reality of Prabha's veracity, fundamentally radiant, luminous mind. This is the ultimate unchanging ground of all human consciousness. It is a state of awareness that is inherently brilliant, completely unstained by history, and fundamentally free from the illusions of lack or separation. From this pristine sky of awareness, you look back at the entire landscape of your historical struggle. You see the relationship, the heartbreak, the years of obsessive mental loopings, and the intense internal battles not as personal failures, but as the precise, sacred, and necessary alchemical processes required to break the hard shell of your ego. The individual who refused to leave your mind did not do so out of random psychological cruelty. They stayed because they were under a profound, spiritual mandate from your own highest intelligence to remain until you had absolutely no choice but to discover that your true security, your true worth, and your true peace can never be dependent on any transient form in the universe. They locked you in the fire until you turned into gold. Look at their image one final time within the wide, beautiful, and cool space of your sovereign heart. See them clearly, strip them of all historical blame, and grant them absolute, unconditional release. They have completed their work. You have finished your training. The well is clean, the dialogue is silent, the body is open, and the sky of your mind is completely, flawlessly clear. Go forward into the world, resting effortlessly as the vast, luminous awareness that is your eternal birthright. You are permanently, structurally, and absolutely free. The masterclass is fully concluded. Every layer of the haunted mind has been thoroughly explored, mapped, and deconstructed with clinical precision. You possess the complete blueprint, the diagnostic tools, and the advanced operational protocols required to maintain absolute cognitive sovereignty and spiritual freedom under any relational condition. The architecture is complete. The teachings are fully delivered. Rest effortlessly as the boundless sky of your true awareness. May you walk through life with a cool, radiant, and unshakable heart.